yes, there's disinformation and misinformation spread online through a lot of these social media platforms, but these companies are also making an effort to engage voters. We run National Voter Registration Day, and Meta is involved. Tumblr, we do a Reddit AMA. Snap always puts out really cool filters. So social media companies are also engaging in this space, and trying to get more young people and voters in general registered and informed and aware. And of course, campaigns are really leveraging social media. So I think overall, it's a net positive, and there's a lot of good that can come through leveraging those social media channels.
Good evening. I'm Susan Spurlock, Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University, and I'd like to welcome you to our final program of our Fall 2022, Spring 2023 virtual lecture series, Our Issues, Our Voices, Our Votes, Youth Civic Participation Today. This evening's program is entitled Tea Leaves. What does the present tell us about the future of youth voting? With the 2022 midterms in the rearview mirror, we look at the results to help us understand what is to come. What role did the threats to the stability of American democracy play for young voters? What about the urban-rural divide and issues about reproductive rights? The anticipated red wave didn't materialize, and President Biden's low material ratings were delinked from voting intensity, especially among young voters who appeared motivated by policy questions. We now know that the youth vote in the midterms was critical. What are the things to watch for in 2022, 2023? We are delighted that you have joined us as we hear from our panel of experts from across the political and geographic spectrum to examine what happened, why it matters, and what the implications may be. We are actively planning our spring 2023 portion of this series, and we do hope you will join us as we continue to explore the role of youth in our democracy, in our nation. This series is a collaboration among Ford Hall Forum, the Political Science and Legal Studies Department at Suffolk University, the Washington Center, and GBH Forum Network. I'd like to thank also the Lowell Institute for their generous funding, which makes programs like this possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Christina Coolidge, who is a faculty member of the Political Science and Legal Studies Department at Suffolk University, my colleague, and one of the visionaries behind this and our 4 previous survey courses for everyone. Kudos to you, Christina. I'm tossing it to you.
Thank you, Susan. That was very kind, but this is a team effort, and that also includes all of our panelists, students, and attendees. So in this last episode of this fall semester, we really want to look at what happened in the midterms in terms of younger voter registration and turnout, as well as participation in all kinds of much more expansive ways. We know that youth turnout, meaning 18 to 29-year-olds, hit a second best ever rate since we started really keeping records, which is great, which we're excited about. But the bigger picture is that it's only 27% of those who are eligible to turn out. So there's a lot of work to be done. Data is still coming in, but some of the top line findings are that we know that youth turnout in some key races was important. In Michigan, in the referendum in Kansas, in issue voting, particularly on reproductive rights. So the real question is, and I have not been very optimistic about the health of American democracy, but one of the things that we do know about this past election is that there was a lot of what we call ticket splitting, which means people don't vote for the party they most affiliate with up and down the ticket. And it seems that Gen Z and millennials are much more focused on policy and issues than they are on partisan identity. And if that's a trend that continues and can grow, that is a really good sign. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panel and then throw it to Katie Lannon to start the conversation. So tonight we have with us Caitlin Donnelly, Canyon Woodward, Kostas Lukas, Sam Abrams, all of whom come from different lanes in what we're looking at. Caitlin does nonpartisan voter registration. Canyon focuses on activating and mobilizing rural voters. Kostas Lukas is a Suffolk alum and one of the youngest elected members in Massachusetts in state government. Sam Abrams is a non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a professor of political science at Sarah Lawrence University. And we also have Alvaro Diaz, who is a student at the University of Arizona and an active member of young voters and organizing the Latinx community. So without further ado, Katie, take it from here.
Excellent. Thanks, Christina. And thank you to our great group of panelists here and everyone else who is joining us to watch along and hear what they have to say. So I think Christina really set this up great with that intro there. And I would love to hear maybe, Sam, from your work, what kind of things are driving young voters if it's not this partisan identity, and what kind of impact are we seeing from them?
Got it. Well, thank you for having me. I went to grad school across the river in Cambridge, so it's always a thrill to be back in Boston. Spent more hours than I care to admit watching WGBH and this old house. And just another thing I have to mention, I work with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And I think the world of the Ford Hall Forum, thank you for being such an important critical institution. Whether you agree with certain speech or not, to have a public forum for speech like this is crucial. So thank you for doing it. In terms of what I'm seeing, I've been looking over the last few years at Gen Z and millennials. And one thing that a lot of our survey work is not doing is breaking them apart. When we say 18 to 29, sure, we can create that cut point. But without doing that, you're artificially bringing two very different groups together. And a number of years ago, I noticed that my teaching and when I would visit other universities changed a little bit. I noticed that there was a lot less antagonism in the classroom. There was a lot less focus on questions of harm and a lot more focus on unity and finding shared narratives. And this linked up nicely to generational change, i.e., I noticed a lot more ideas about unity and how to move the country forward with Gen Z, rather than millennials. And my colleagues and I at a number of institutions, and most recently at the University of Texas, Austin, Professor Jeremy Suri and I did a big survey called the Future of Politics Survey. And voting and turnout aside, what we keep seeing over and over and over again is, what Professor Coolidge said. We're seeing issue-based voters. They look liberal and democratic because the Democrats are putting forward more centrist, quite frankly, and more reasonable positions on the question of abortion, for instance. There really isn't much debate. Almost 90% of Americans believe abortion is a fundamental right and shouldn't be touched. So when you have these wedge issues in certain electoral locations, that's really quite a myth. Very few Americans actually see it differently. So what we're seeing over and over again is, yes, Gen Z students, especially on college and university campuses, they lean a little bit to the left. About a third of the students are liberal. About a fifth of the students are conservative, but the bulk of the students are centrist. They're in the middle. They care about bringing the communities together. They care about finding practical solutions. And that's what they're going for. Again, as Professor Coolidge mentioned, we see that reflected in the split ticket voting. We're not seeing pure ideologues. You're not seeing cases where it's just all down the ticket for Republicans or all down the ticket for Democrats, but people are voting on the basis of issue. They're voting on the basis of practical concerns. And I'm very, very optimistic because this group really seems to be a centrist swinging group that's going to move. So what I keep arguing is that whichever party is smart enough to wake up and to say, hey, there's this new generation coming online. They're going to be well over 20% of the electorate, by 2024. They're going to be powerful. Again, as Professor Coolidge mentioned, Gen Z played a huge role in the 2022 elections. The issue now is which party can cultivate them. And one thing to just mention is that don't count the GOP out. They're not great at this, but it would be a mistake to assume that they're just going to go liberal. The Democrats are having a lot of trouble keeping on message. And there are significant numbers of undergrads still who like some of the Republican messaging, even though it may seem extreme, especially to students who are in schools in the greater New England area. So I'm very optimistic. I think we have a very moderate, practical, pragmatic, and quite frankly, loving and considerate generation coming online that's looking for unity and some form of real discourse and progress.
Great. And Caitlin, as you've been involved in engagement work this past election, what are you seeing in terms of young people and their interest level in getting involved?
Well, thank you for having me. I've seen that a lot of young people are, yes, very energized and hopeful, but they're also contending with some larger election administration issues and just the way we run elections and voting in our country, just sort of butting up against their desire to participate. So we, as Sam said, the policy fights are really illuminating, really energizing, but we also see differences in turnout, not just along policy, states where there's like a significant ballot measure, maybe around abortion or another important issue, but states that have more generous laws around voter registration or how to vote, that is impacting youth turnout as well. So there's, of course, a lot of enthusiasm, but we have to make sure that we are reducing barriers where they exist.
So what kinds of things can be done to reduce those barriers?
Well, I definitely think making registration more convenient is one big thing that we can do. States with automatic voter registration saw a 3.5 percentage point, bump in their youth voter turnout rates. But we can also, in the states that don't have online voter registration, add that. I'm a big advocate for same-day registration. When I think back to the first election that I was eligible, first presidential election I was eligible to vote in, I did not participate because I was an out-of-state student and I just did not understand how I could vote. I didn't know which state I was allowed to vote in. I didn't know if it would impact my, financial aid status. So there are some really great groups across the country that are making sure that students know that they can register in either place, that just only vote in one. So making that process easier. So if you have a same day registration where you can just walk into an early voting center or on election day, a polling place, show whatever documents you need to show and register and vote right there. I think that would be huge in helping more young people to vote. More and more states are allowing that, but I think we're always going to be, I don't know, a few cycles, at least midterm and presidential cycles, away from knowing what the real impact is of that. Because, of course, people need to know that that's available to them, and it needs to be sort of incorporated into the voting culture in that state. So there are definitely some state level policies that can be used, but there's also things like just making sure that polling places are places where young people feel comfortable being, and that poll workers, reflect young people, and not, we have a system that is primarily staffed by older, maybe retired volunteers. So if we can have more young people involved in those positions, I think that all makes the election administration sort of friction reduced, and it's an easier process for people to get involved with. Because right now, depending on which state you're in, it can be so complicated and cumbersome figuring out how and where to vote.
And Caitlin, you mentioned the idea of representation of seeing younger people involved. Costas, I'd love to hear what you think about that as a younger person who holds an elected office. What do you feel when you're in a room of town government, and I assume it's mostly people older than you?
Yeah, so just a couple of weeks ago, I actually had the opportunity to attend the Massachusetts Moderators Association meeting. And in that meeting, I was the youngest person by decades. And it was definitely interesting to see, because I knew I was entering a field that people were older and a little bit more experienced because of that age. But I don't necessarily think that translates to the voters. In the two elections that I've done, the most two recent cycles, so our municipal election in town here is every year, we've seen an increase in voter turnout among youth voters. So in 2020, we saw record numbers of voters in town. For approximately 50 years, we had percentages that didn't break 10% of voter turnout. And we had about 18% of people in town turn out and vote. And, us in municipal government, we were excited, but that number wasn't really that great. 18 out of 100 is, a failing score by, any educational metric. But I'm proud that a lot of younger people turned out by the hundreds. 382 people turned out in 2020, which was my first year on the ballot. And I think that it was really encouraging for young people to see someone young on the ballot and pushing an issue forward. While I was out there holding signs with people who were 3 times my age, holding signs, and had been in town government since before I was even born. That was really encouraging. And I think showing young people that it really isn't that difficult to be involved on the municipal level will really work to encourage voter turnout. And then as people participate in local government, it'll encourage them to participate in state and federal government and just be more active. And I think that'll come with time.
And Canyon, I know you do organizing work. What kinds of things do you see younger voters looking for in candidates?
Yeah, so I come from a super rural part of Western North Carolina, pretty conservative, and I was fairly politically disengaged growing up, and through a good bit of college, and really got into organizing by way of the climate movement, the Keystone XL pipeline fight heating up when I entered college, and organizing around fossil fuel divestment at Harvard. And that experience kind of led me into the electoral sphere, realizing that nothing was happening on climate because of the folks that we have in office, and in large part not having the majorities that progressives need because of the huge rural-urban divide that's grown just over the past 13 years, really. In 2009, it was a dead even partisan lean amongst rural voters, and now we're up to over 20 points, leaning towards Republicans. And so it was kind of that context that I teamed up with Chloe Maxman, who's now the youngest female state senator in Maine's history. We co-coordinated the fossil fuel divestment campaign, and she moved back to her small town in Maine, and we graduated in 2015, and ran a couple of successful races in the most rural county in what's the most rural state in the country by percentage of population, and also the oldest county by age in Maine. So had this 25-year-old pretty leftist climate activist coming into a district with a 16-point Republican advantage in a super rural area, and folks responded really, really well to it, both young and old, which was really encouraging, because I think it's obvious that young people want to see young people leading and running for office. Like that is something that will get the youth vote excited and get folks organizing and participating and seeing themselves stepping into those kinds of positions. But I think one of the really encouraging things too is to see that, you know, the baby boomer generation and older folks were also really excited to get on board with a really young candidate. And yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that I see with youth is just needing more role models like Chloe and like Kostas to lead the way and run for office and serve in positions of elected leadership. And then we really just need that badly in our politics too, is not just having youth engaged in voting and in organizing, which of course we do need, but we need them in office to counterbalance the kind of inertia and entrenched mindsets of a lot of the mainstream Democratic establishment and certainly the Republican establishment. I think youth have a special magic of being able to look at the world as it is and envision it totally differently as it could be, and not be tied to, well, you know, that just hasn't worked. So that gives me a lot of hope, and hope we can get more people to run.
So how do you encourage younger candidates to run when we see so many offices held for years and years by people who in some cases are in their 80s or approaching it? How do you get people to find a place for them in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think storytelling is one important piece. Telling stories of successful young candidates who have run, and you know, the media plays a huge role in that. I think that AOC has been a huge inspiration for a whole generation of left-leaning activists, of having that story told really well, of her challenging you know, someone who kind of fits that mold and defeating him and winning that seat in New York. And yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things, is just getting those stories out there so that people see them and they see that it's possible, and as much as possible to do it in a way that makes it accessible and breaks down some of the barriers of, like, you don't have to, you know, have a law degree and XYZ experience before you can jump into this. Just to encourage folks to do it. Organizations like Run for Something are really really good that way with recruiting young candidates. And I also really like to invoke Michelle Obama. I should look up what the actual quote is, but she said something great that was along the lines of like, I've been in all of those rooms and the people in those rooms are not that smart. Like you can basically to the effect of don't let imposter syndrome or thinking that other folks have it more figured out than you, don't let that stop you from taking the leap and running for office.
Alvaro, as you're on campus, are your peers interested in running for office? Do they vote? What's kind of the vibe there in terms of civic engagement?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to the rest of the panelists. A lot of good knowledge being shared here. So yeah, what you're seeing around in campus is a lot of political engagement, like we said, around issues. You don't see a lot of people advocating for candidates anymore. I remember in the first election that I was able to vote was in 2018, and you saw a lot of more young people kind of like engaged with the candidates, with the campaigns of the candidates. I think in this time, it was more to see people advocating for issues itself, like gun control. It's a very specific one to my university, because an incident we had last month. And then you also had the issue of abortion, and then all these other issues that are penetrating the agenda more than the candidate itself. There's not a lot of enthusiasm around students, especially undergraduate students, to endorse specific candidates unless there is something that we can get out of them in terms of them being elected to their positions. Like they explain, like Sam explained, like Professor Coolidge explained as well. It's very issue centered, and it's I believe we are way more pragmatic and the way we do things, and then the way we cast our votes. Yeah, I believe it's like only 54% of young voters are registered only Republican or Democrat. So that tells you that you have a huge percentage of Gen Zers that are not identifying themselves as either Republican or Democrat, which is telling you that they're not going along party lines, which is a trend that we had been seeing since the past elections. And then the midterm election kind of confirmed it. So you're not seeing a lot of canvassing around. I think the main takeaway is that you're not seeing a lot of canvassing around candidates itself, but you're seeing it more around issues and things that you don't want to happen, or things that you want to happen. I think that's what you're seeing. So it's shifting more away from the party and the candidate, and it's going more around the issue, which is confirming of what we've all said.
And what's your experience, Ben? How are you getting involved and trying to encourage that?
Yeah, so my experience, of course, has been voting, first of all, and I really like what Caitlin said about making it more accessible, and then just hearing the fact that you can register on the same day, like, makes my mind blow, because myself, I live in a county where I go to college, but I'm from another county, like a rural county, that I didn't know I was registered. I thought that my registration moved when I moved my license or whatever. It did it. I found out 3 days before the election. I was like, why haven't I gotten my ballot at my apartment? So it turned out that I had to go vote to the other county. I had to drive 2 hours to get there, and just so I could go vote in person. So I am a really big advocate, specifically in my community in Southern Arizona. We have a lot of Spanish speakers. We have a lot of Latino community. And in terms of accessibility, I think a lot of folks in my community, in my area, they're just not familiar with the process of what it is to go voting, or what it is to go register to vote. Where can I register to vote? Does it come with my license? Do I have to go to an office? Do I have to call someone? Do I have to reach out to an organization, etc.? So I think I'm a big advocate for education in terms of voting, and just being able to tell voters that that is an option that is available to them, and then just being able to tell voters what the means are for them to get to the polls and like actually cast their ballot. I think that's a really important point. I'm glad that Caitlin brought it up.
Sam, I see that you have your hand up. Was there something you wanted to add?
Yes, because you said we should jump in.
Yeah,
so
please
let me
do.
jump in before you throw it open to the audience. And I wanted to say, that I completely agree with Kenyon's position about storytelling. And storytelling, there's so much philosophy that I could quote, which I will not do at this hour, about how do you move masses. You can do it by coercion, you can do it by force. But the most robust way to do that generally is through meaningful storytelling. How do you find some spark that actually compels groups to go along with you? And one of the things that I'm very, again, optimistic about, and I've been on the optimistic train for a while now, is that, Kenyon had mentioned AOC, which is literally a stone's throw away from where I'm currently sitting. And, unlike a number of years ago where you had to work within a power elite, you had to work within a pre-existing structure. That's a lot less critical today. AOC was able to topple, the number 3 Democrat in the House by working around that, fundraising very easily, with one of these things, which is incredible. And we mentioned First Lady Obama. I mean, the fact is, Obama toppled an elite too to get as far as he did because he took down the Clinton machine. To ultimately win that nomination too. So as we become a little bit more pluralistic, as Gen Zers and millennials certainly are certainly very comfortable using these technologies and fundraising in mass, I'm optimistic again that we will be able to get a lot more turnout if we can manipulate these technologies and harness the power of these technologies. And Costas, who I see your hand up too, thank you for doing this as a young person. We do need more of it, and without making you feel too weird, people like you actually inspire students like mine. You're close enough in age, but when they see it, they realize something can actually be done. And the way students relate to AOC, for instance, at Sarah Lawrence is unreal. AOC would visit our campus all the time, pre winning the election. So these stories and this level of engagement really can and does matter. So thank you for doing it. And Kenyon, it's all about storytelling. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, Costas?
Yeah, the first time that I ran for office for the position that I currently hold, I actually ran against an incumbent of 35 years. And this position is elected yearly in town. So he had 35 elections of experience under his belt. I wasn't successful the first time around, but it showed the older generation and that, kind of political establishment that we have, that, I'm ready. The younger generation is ready to step up and work towards making our society and our community better. And if we show them that we're qualified and that we're willing to do the work, it is possible. And, ultimately I came and I ran a second time, and then I ended up getting the least amount of blank votes with, the highest amount of votes that were cast in that election. And it was phenomenal. And I'll go to our town meeting. We have a town meeting coming up this week on Thursday night, and people who are older than my grandparents will come up to me and say, thank you for running for town moderator and being interested in what happens here in town politics, because ultimately it's not as flashy as, AOC or Ed Markey or one of these big name elected officials, but it keeps the town moving and keeps us functioning and together.
And so maybe a question for all of you, but I'll start with Caitlin on this one is, when you have those big flashy races, those big names on the ballots, that's one thing, but how do you get voters engaged when there maybe isn't that much competition, or it is a lower level of government? What drives engagement in those types of races?
Well, I'm going to speak from a very nonpartisan stance, so not necessarily related to campaigning. I've never done it. I don't know, other than being, a dispatched volunteer with my minivan. I haven't done much campaigning, but when we're talking about just making sure people are educated about those local races, I think nonprofits can play a big role in that. So especially for the people they serve and their staff, but just getting the word out generally. And then there are many great civic engagement nonprofits. There might be one in your community, like League of Women Voters, which is a nonpartisan organization, and they do voter registration, but they also do a lot of voter education. I've seen really great pamphlets and guides that the League has put together. And, they really do look at those down ballot races. There are also a number of apps. So in addition to League of Women Voters and their vote411.org site, where you can type in your address and get ballot information, there's also ballotready.org. There's Activote, and there are some other, there's guides.vote, which is not an app, and that is a little bit higher profile races. But Ballot Ready and Activote really focus as well down ballot. And for nonprofits that might be a little concerned about, weighing in on these local matters, I think there's a lot of education we can do just about what these roles are. I went to public school in New Hampshire, and I think I was in 5th or 6th grade when I learned about state government, but I don't live in that state anymore, and I don't remember a lot from 5th or 6th grade. So there's a lot of education we can do just about what these local races and how they really impact us. I, every year that I vote, have to do a little research and figure out, well, what does a county commissioner do? And what's the difference between an attorney general and a district attorney? So there's conversations that we can all be having with our friends and family and peers. And there are some really good places that we can find information to fuel those conversations. And I think more and more sort of election offices are coming online, and more candidates are building an online presence. So that information is more readily available than maybe it ever was before.
I think that's great. Thank you so much for all the work you do in the nonprofit space, Caitlin. I'd chime in from the campaign perspective. Great shout out to minivan. I think the door-to-door exactly is the most important thing that we can do to get folks involved in the down ballot races, and especially having candidates who are willing to go out there and knock tons of doors and have those direct conversations with voters, because the county level, city level, in most states, state legislative level races are a really awesome opportunity where you have a small enough voting group that you can really go out and reach a lot of it face to face. And I think also in today's climate where we have so much division and distrust in the democratic process itself, I think it's even more important to go out and have our electeds talking to folks face to face and having real conversations so that people feel, connected to folks who are in office. And I think that's especially true, again, from a rural standpoint, and something that a place where the Democratic Party and Democratic leadership in particular has really gone wrong, and we need a huge course correction. In 2018, when Chloe was first running for State House, the chair of the DNC at the time said, "You can't knock doors in rural America," quote, which is just absolutely wrong and a super destructive mindset, but also really revealing of just where the Democratic Party has been at in terms of grassroots organizing and reaching out to rural voters over the past decade, I think. Folks like Chloe are doing a great job of disproving that idea. In 2018, she had a primary, and she knocked the door of almost every Democrat in her state house district and broke record turnout by 40% in a midterm for that district. The half the precincts had to get special approval from the Secretary of State to make photocopies of the ballots because they ran out of ballots because it was unprecedented turnout, and that was all because of the door-to-door, face-to-face conversations.
Sam?
So, I love what both Caitlin and Kenyon said, and I want to just echo that. Insofar as there have been, we have, insofar as I have, two big things to mention. The first is that COVID-19 has fundamentally altered the way so many see politics. Years and years and years ago, you would have local races and even statewide races, but it always seemed like America was, at the federal level. And we had governors and whatever, but we didn't think about, how powerful are our local officials in shaping our day-to-day lives. Survey data now shows we realize just how darn important and powerful they are. The simplest way to think about that is look at the lockdowns, look at the very drastically different ways in which states and municipalities reacted and behaved. I think that our younger Americans certainly realize that state and local elections matter in a way that certainly they didn't matter when I was an undergrad over 20 years ago. We didn't think about it that way, and the survey data sort of shows that. Secondly, to Kenyon's point, and again, this is the critical work that Caitlin and so many other nonprofits do, which is knocking on the door. We know a few things in political science. A lot of what we thought about the presidency, for instance, is wrong. But we do know that, what is the most powerful thing, you can do to have someone show up at the ballot, box? You just have to ask them to do it. So Kenyon, you're absolutely right. The more times you knock on a door and say, would you vote? Would you vote? It is so darn powerful. And it's not just your unique experiences, which are absolutely correct and legitimate, of course. But, we have decades of systemic evidence suggesting and showing unquestionably that when you mobilize, when you engage, turnout rises. And while it may not be, 10, 15%, we know that even 3 or 4% increases can have a huge difference in impact. And over time, that can accrete to really raising the voice of people who hadn't had those voices before. So I just want to echo Caitlin and Kenyon's points very, very strongly there.
Great. Costas, I'll turn it to you. And then I want to ask Alvaro about Arizona a little bit before I bring in a couple students to ask their questions.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, like Kenyon was saying about hitting the doors, my first election, when I ran for town moderator, I was unsuccessful, but the 2 precincts that we were able to knock doors in before COVID lockdowns happened were the 2 precincts that I won. Hitting those doors is important, and quite simply asking people to vote. Them seeing a voter seeing one candidate or not seeing another candidate will make or break an election. And just teaching people how important municipal government is. Like Sam said, there's a lot that municipal government can actually do. Municipal government can tell you how big your house is. They can tell you how small your house is, how close or how far you have to be from water supplies and wetlands in order to protect the environment. And in most of Massachusetts and a lot of New England, we have open town meeting or representative town meeting, where any registered voter has the opportunity to propose a law or some sort of zoning restriction or bylaw, and then go to town meeting and debate it and talk with your fellow community members and then act on it. Here in Mansfield, we have an open town meeting where our select board, which kind of serves as the executive body of our town, really can't do anything without the approval of our town meeting. So all 17,775 registered voters in town are allowed to come to this town meeting and vote and decide how our town is going to be run. And when people understand that they have that sort of opportunity to participate, people really become involved because they want to make sure that their house can be 2,500 square feet and not 100 square feet, or that they can paint their fence red or white, not only black. Definitely participate in your local elections.
Great. So shifting gears from municipal government in Massachusetts to state government in Arizona. Alvaro, you had some contentious races in Arizona this cycle. I was out there not long before the midterm election, and it was just a constant bombardment of ads. And I know some of those races ended up being very close. Did you feel that the candidates were to you as a young voter, or did they give you a reason to vote for them or vote against them? What was that it like living through this election cycle?
Yeah, it was definitely bombarding with ads everywhere, on the streets, on the radio, even on the internet. And it was a very close race, especially governor race one. The Democrat Party won the governor race, but it was a really important election because I feel like most voters were going out to vote against the other candidate instead of in favor of the Democratic Party itself. I think most people in Arizona was voting a bit against Blake Masters, and that showed because it was like a less of a closer race than the governor race was. So you're seeing that this disparity in people voting maybe for Democrat on the Senate, but they're maybe not voting for Democrat on the governor. And that happened because we saw a lot of importance being put on the Senate race, at least from my perspective, from what I saw, all the ads and everything. I saw way more importance being put on the Senate race from the Democratic Party because I guess we were contending the control of the Senate and all of that. However, the governor race, I don't think a lot of people was expecting it to be that close. It was less than 1% difference. And I think up until yesterday, there was one county that refused to certify the election results. So it's still up in the air. It's been a very, very like chaotic election, at least from what I've seen. I've never seen anything like that before. Like I said, I started voting in 2018. I've never voted for governor before. This is my first time. So it's been pretty chaotic for me to be the first time seeing the election. But I really hope it turns out well. Whoever stays, the elected officials at the end are going to have to do a really great job to bring kind of everyone together, especially young voters, and just convince them that they made the right choice because these were very, very, very close races.
Does that chaos make you want to come back for more next election, or does it have you interested in kind of tuning it out?
I think it depends on how they perform, how the elected leaders perform in these following years. Because I think if we keep seeing more of the same, it might be more of young voters. We might feel like, is it even worth it to go out into this political context where it's so divided, where maybe socially it's costing me to vote for this candidate or for this other candidate? Or is it really worth it to go out and to this environment that is very conflicting when I know that there is not a lot of possibility of change? I think that's the question that I'm asking myself, and that like many people are asking themselves here in Arizona, just in the sense of, well, if something good, if something positive comes out of this, well, then maybe, yes, I'll come back and reevaluate in 4 years, in 2 years, in 6 years. But if nothing comes out of it, and pretty much if the political context is still the same in the next election, I feel like a lot of people are going to feel not motivated to go out.
All right, I have a few more questions I want to ask and some things I want to cover, but I also want to make sure we have time for the student questions that we have. A couple from Imen and Carrie. So if you two are on, maybe Imen, I'll turn it to you first.
Yeah, thank you very much for our panel, and thank you, Katie, for moderating this webinar. So my question is actually to the panel. As we have seen during these latest midterms, youth were very encouraged and represented to come into the polls. My question is related to how could we make sure that we will have our democracy saved and well represented when most of the youth are referring to influencers, as many media have highlighted. What mechanism could we install to make sure we won't have disinformation or misinformation communicated to our youth so they could participate and vote with a trust and would be represented? Thank you.
Yeah, Sam, do you want to jump in there first?
Yes. So first, I am not an expert on this. The folks at MIT are across the river, so you should definitely talk to them about misinformation more than me. What I would say, as soon as you offered that very important question, is this. Again, I've been doing intense survey research on Gen Z now for almost 5 years now. And one of the things that keeps coming up is that this is a cohort of individuals who understands how to look for signal out of a lot of noise. When I first started teaching at the collegiate level, I would often ask my students to make a presentation in front of the class. This wasn't because I wanted to stress them out or hurt them, but rather I wanted them to become comfortable making presentations and speaking in sort of a public way. What's so interesting today, and especially over the last few years, is they have the phones. They're so used to, talking and presenting on the phones that these folks are better presenters than me. I mean, it's so professional. It's so good. I'm like, geez, I don't know how to do half of those tricks. So I don't have a great answer for you in terms of how to handle the question of bots and AI and misinformation and hacking. And, can you do real-time censorship? Facebook is not very good, although no one's on Facebook relative to, say, TikTok or Twitter in terms of younger people. But again, the optimism stems from the fact that the survey work regularly shows that folks can process a huge amount of inbounds. Folks are incredibly skeptical and critical, which I like. And I know this is WGBH, but I'll use the word the BS meter is pretty good with these students. They get it, they know it, and they're careful about it. So I know that's not a satisfying answer, but it's something I think about quite a bit. And my sense is that we're dealing with a very savvy group of people, far more savvy than, say, my mother. And sorry, Mom, if you're watching this, who I can't handle the number of bizarre articles she sends me and says, hey, did you know this? I'm like, this is not true. Where are you getting this from? So, I'm somewhat optimistic that, that we may not have a great technological fix for dealing with this stuff. It just may be so pervasive, so omnipresent, so crushing. But I'm optimistic that our younger cohort of folks know how to sort of see the noise, see the real stuff, and still talk about it. And again, I hope that's somewhat satisfying as an answer.
Alvaro, something to add there?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with Sam in the sense that there's a lot of social media like literacy between Gen Z. So there's definitely like the capability of differentiating between a fake news and a real one. And I think that comes in terms of technology and maybe algorithms and all this stuff that comes with social media. But then you mentioned also influencers, and I think that's a really important part of it, because influencers are real people who are telling stories and who are forming narratives, and then they are storytellers. Basically, they are storytellers of issues, of things that are going on, that are not going on. And I think in that sense, even though we are very technical about social media and know how to differentiate like fake news from like real news and misinformation, I think there is an aspect of accountability when it comes to influencers that we definitely need to address. And I don't know the answer on how to do that, but I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think there's an aspect of accountability for these persons that are actual people that are telling like information to their followers. and those can and should be held accountable, I believe.
Great, thank you. And Iman, thank you for raising that. And Carrie, we'll take your question.
Yeah, so kind of sticking with the same idea of technology. In recent years, we've seen an uprise in younger generations engaging in politics on social media. So in what ways do you think social media has affected or influenced youth voter turnout in the midterms?
Costas, it looked like your hand went up there pretty quick.
Yeah, I think young people are just easier to reach via social media. I know I talk to my friends all the time, and leading up to the primary, they're talking about all the phone calls and the text messages they're getting from campaigns. And they say, well, I'm getting a phone call from a random number from Illinois or, Pennsylvania. I'm not going to answer it. I don't know who this person is. But if they scroll through their social media and you share to a community Facebook page or somebody on Twitter likes it, they're going to see that because they are spending time on social media. And I think they're easier to reach that way. And I think a lot of that we saw in 2018, with a so-called rise of AOC and the squad being able to pull out their phones and do a Facebook or Instagram live and directly reach people and take conversations with people, take live comments and questions. And we saw that continue on through the pandemic where people couldn't go out there and directly reach people. I know in my election, it was in the height of COVID. We pulled nomination papers February 1st, March 13th, everything locked down. We couldn't talk to a single person in person. So we had to resort to social media. And that was the year with the highest voter turnout in youth, 18 to 30 in Mansfield's history. So I think it's an important tool and pretty easy to use for most younger people.
And Caitlin, what do you think?
I would agree completely. I think that it does make it easier for people to connect. And, as Costas said, you get that call from an unfamiliar number. You're not going to receive that message the same way as you would someone that you have a relationship with, that you have both in real life and online, maybe through social media, or even, influencers or other people that you respect and, you look to their opinion. Maybe it's usually more about makeup or video games. I don't know, but still it's somebody that you have a connection with. Like that's a much better messenger around voting than someone that you don't have any trust or anything built up with. So I think social media is really powerful in that way. And yes, there's disinformation and misinformation spread online through a lot of these social media platforms, but these companies are also making an effort to engage voters. We run National Voter Registration Day, and Meta is involved. Tumblr, we do a Reddit AMA. Snap always puts out really cool filters. So social media companies are also engaging in this space and trying to get more young people and voters in general registered and informed and aware. And of course, campaigns are really leveraging social media. So I think overall, it's a net positive, and there's a lot of good that can come through leveraging those social media channels.
Great. So social media has been, Sam?
Oh, sure. Since you said jump in, and
yes, no, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Caitlin, I hope you're right. I really, really hope you're right. And I've just been very taken aback of late with, some of the very real algorithm changes. As someone in his 40s, I go onto Facebook, I don't even know what I'm looking at half the time. My big concern is it enough? I know Meta, i.e. Facebook, occasionally does this stuff, and I know it's really important for turnout. But, my feeds are getting weirder by the day when I look at what I'm seeing on Instagram, what I'm seeing. I'm not on Tumblr, but what I'm seeing on Instagram or Facebook. And it's, again, the goal is to engage you and keep you hooked with various stimuli. And, I hope you're right. I used to be a little more positive on the social media stuff, but of late it's gotten a little messy, for at least some of the algorithms that I've seen. I go to Facebook and I realize I don't know who well over half of the people or things I'm seeing. And I don't know why that's occurring. And, we see reports out all the time saying, you're going to see these changes. So I hope you're right. I agree that they could be incredibly powerful tools, but I worry that also they're being corrupted. They're not public goods. They're private for-profit companies. And let's see if I get shut down from, Facebook tonight for saying this, but I'm not as, positive that these companies like, Google, which used to say do no evil, are actually doing no evil. They're there to fit their bottom line. And that worries me just a little bit.
Sam, I do want to stick with you a second. Social media has obviously been a change. You talked about kind of a change from more of an antagonism to a unity approach. Have you seen changes in campus politics as well? Maybe a move away from the gotcha politics and incendiary speakers? What have you observed?
So first of all, it's there. The gotcha politics is very pronounced. It's still there. In most cases, they're being these sort of events are being paid for by outside groups that have nothing to do with the college. And what I would call it's the tyranny of the minority. A very small number of people are bringing these people in with the explicit goal of pushing buttons. And there was this big blow up about Ann Coulter at Cornell a week or two ago with that. And as the president said, she had a right to speak, and you just made her speech far more important by having a big blow up around that sort of speech. Again, my sense is that students really could care less about a lot of this. If they go to see an incendiary speaker, it's for entertainment value. They're not necessarily taking it as seriously. And again, I am finding, and I know that Professor Kulich has also found some of this in her own teaching, that students are just not in the mood. And I think that's one positive benefit from the lockdowns and just this nicer generation. They don't care about the gotcha the same way. There will always be some. It's often over publicized, but it's just not what most students want. They want to learn, and quite frankly, they want to have some fun again. And I think they're less interested in the gotcha stuff.
Thank you. And Costas, I want to ask you a question about town meeting. It's, I know I have covered town meetings before where they're going out to the baseball field trying to find a quorum, maybe an extra parent who could pop in. Participation's really low. It's often the room's full of older people, homeowners. Is this an inclusive government?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it is usually an older crowd that turns out to town meeting. Younger parents and younger families with young kids can struggle to attend town meetings because they're scheduled for 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. And they have one kid that's in soccer practice and one kid that's going to karate, and the other kid that needs help with their homework. And it is really difficult. And there are ways around it to make it more inclusive and allow people and bring in younger people and people in general by offering different types of programs. A couple weeks ago at the Mass Moderators Association meeting, we were talking about how we go about increasing participation in town meeting. And some town meetings offer programs where they partner with the schools and create an assignment where students have to go to town meeting and learn about town meeting and the way that their town is governed. And then a special section is provided that is almost like a mini daycare, so that the kids are there with their parents and their parents can participate, but the kids are also there learning about town government. Quorum is always an issue, especially if there's no hot button topics on the town meeting warrant. Last year, we had a couple of citizens petitions that were pretty contentious. So we saw 450 people turn out, which is great for a town meeting, but if you put in the grand scheme of things, 450 people out of 17,000 is not great. And it lends itself to people who participate, which is why it's so important to increase that participation there. The more people that participate, the more people's voices are heard. I think open town meeting is one of the most important forms of government, because it does allow everyone a very strong voice to decide things. I know a couple of years ago, the town of Middleborough was creating a compact with a tribe of indigenous people in the area and to put a casino in, and 2,300 people showed up to town meeting, which is an astonishingly high turnout. And I don't even know what I would do if that many people turned out to my town meeting Thursday night. But I think it's important to keep this form of government strong and available for people.
On kind of that same note, and I'll toss this out to anyone, but as we're talking about a rise in youth turnout and figures trending upward there, we're still talking about really low overall turnout figures. Should we be celebrating when the numbers are still that low? Costas?
I don't think that it's quite cause for celebration yet. I mean, I think we should all be excited that the numbers are trending up. But in the most recent municipal election in town in 2021, 116 people voted who were 18 to 30. And I know each graduating class has at least 300 people in it. So there are a lot of people in that age group available to vote in town. And it's important to keep working and increasing that voter participation, because I think sometimes we can get a little bit complacent and say, look, you know, if you're part of one political party or the other political party, we won the House, we won the Senate, whatever that might be, and then kind of lose the drive to keep working towards whatever goal you have. So I think it's important that everybody keeps pushing to increase voter participation among young people until it hits 100%. I mean, if our goal is to increase voter participation, that should be our target number always. And I think that's my personal goal with town meeting, and I would imagine everyone else on the panel feels the same.
Great. Sam, were you going to jump in there?
I can always jump in if you'd like.
Please do.
You know, liberal arts professor, I always have views on stuff like this. So I agree with Costas. The number is not reason to celebrate quite yet. We have a lot more work to do. One structural thing that I think bodes well for establishing habitual voting, and that's this tendency of a generation who sort of takes voting as just something you do. You know, when you don't establish that habit, it's hard to establish later in life. We might be lucky enough to establish it among younger people now, is that we live in an era of unstable majorities where we have these razor thin elections all the time. Now, this is bad for the country, right? We don't necessarily like this level of contentiousness, this closeness. But the positive flip side to that is that there really is going to be, for a little while longer, for sure, this sort of unpleasant back and forth. So every election may sort of matter. I just wrote a piece about this where, you know, it creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of instability insofar as you don't feel stable, because every election is kind of important in terms of changing norms and outcomes, but it may lead to higher numbers of turnout and that higher level of voting, because, you know, younger folks certainly realize that they need to show up if they want to preserve things like the environment, like abortion rights and women's rights to choose and control over their bodies and so on. So, you know, that there may be a silver lining. We're nowhere near high enough, but if elections continue to be this contentious for a little longer, that might be a positive externality, a positive consequence.
Excellent, thanks. And I have one audience question I think might be a good note to wrap up on as we wind down on time. So this one is, how do you best engage unengaged voters, not only young people, but others who have tuned out, lost faith in institutions and American democracy at large across all parts of the spectrum? So how do you connect with the unengaged? Caitlin, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, conventional wisdom tells us that there is like a certain group that we cannot adjust their views. And they're just committed to not voting, and that we shouldn't focus our time too much on those folks and focus more on people who are a little bit closer to potentially being engaged. So I'd say that's the first step, is don't engage with anyone who's really there to pick a fight with you and not there in good faith and is, you know, never going to change their mind. But then I would just really relate it to your own life, their life, the local decisions that matter to them. We always talk about services. For a lot of young voters, it's issues, and you can talk about issues. If you're nonpartisan, maybe you talk about government services that are provided, whether that's education, healthcare, roads, transportation, et cetera. But just really talk about the actual impact it can have, and the kinds of decisions that elected officials get to make. And if there is a ballot measure on your ballot that year that we saw this year and in the past, that's a really effective way to get people engaged, because they are deciding on policy right then and there. So those would be my top tips.
Canyon, what do you think? What's the way to engage unengaged voters?
I mean, that at risk of sounding like a little bit of a broken record, going and talking to them door to door, I think, and not showing up with kind of your typical, like, here's your clipboard, here's your lists, try and read off the script, do not deviate from the script, kind of canvassing that has unfortunately dominated a lot of our campaigning when we do that, but instead showing up and just listening and trying to engage with an authentic human interaction that feels good to people and doesn't just feel like you're trying to shove an agenda down their throats, but instead really genuinely interested in hearing where they're coming from and just listening and connecting in a way that they leave the interaction with a positive feeling of how it went.
Great. Well, I think we're definitely a little bit past 7 here, and just in the interest of being respectful of everyone's time, thank you all for joining us this evening, the panelists for your insight, and everyone who tuned in to hear what they have to say. Christina, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you all for giving up your time, for showing up sick, for giving up dinner. And thank you also to our audience and our moderator, Katie, who has been with us throughout this season of webinars. We will be back in the spring, and I hope you'll all tune in. Thanks all.